They called him a reckless fool for taking a damaged foster child into the Montana wilderness where cell service died and rescue helicopters couldn't reach. But when Marcus and 9-year-old Riley emerged 3 weeks later, they carried evidence of a $275 million discovery that would silence an entire town and rewrite both their lives forever. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The town of Pinewood, Montana had exactly 1,423 people, 3 churches, 2 bars, and 1 man everyone agreed was certifiably insane. His name was Marcus Thorne, and if you asked anyone at the Copper Creek Diner about him, they'd tell you the same story. He lived 15 miles outside town in a cabin with no electricity, no running water, and no desire for human company. He was the mountain hermit, the recluse, the man who talked to trees and trusted rocks more than people. At 50 years old, Marcus looked like he'd been carved from the same granite that lined the Bitterroot Mountains. His face was weathered, creased deep from decades of wind and sun. His hands were calloused, scarred, capable. Silver streaked through his dark hair, which he kept tied back with whatever he could find, usually a strip of leather cord or an old bandana. He wore the same clothes year-round, flannel shirts faded to softness, canvas pants with permanent dirt stains, boots held together with duct tape and stubbornness. But it was his eyes that unsettled people. They were sharp, focused, like he was always calculating something the rest of the world couldn't see. Marcus hadn't always been this way. 25 years ago, he'd been Dr. Marcus Thorne, a promising geologist with a PhD from Colorado School of Mines. He'd published papers, presented at conferences, worked for mining companies that paid 6 figures. He had a wife, a son, a house in the suburbs. He had a life that made sense to people. But that was before the theory, before the mocking, before everything fell apart. And long before he became the man sitting alone in a county social services office on a grey Tuesday morning in late June. The office smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucratic exhaustion. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Marcus sat in a plastic chair that was too small for his frame, his knees nearly touching the desk. Across from him sat Patricia Moore, a social worker in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a permanent expression of controlled concern. She'd called him 3 days ago with a question that had surprised them both. "Mr. Thorne," she began, shuffling papers she'd already read a dozen times, "I want to be clear about what we're discussing here. Riley Connors is 9 years old, has been in the system for 4 years. 7 different foster placements in that time. The last family returned Riley after only 3 weeks. Marcus said nothing, just watched her with those unsettling eyes. Patricia continued, her voice softening. Riley has trouble trusting adults, has behavioral issues stemming from early childhood trauma, doesn't do well in traditional school settings, runs away frequently. Most families aren't equipped to handle that level of need. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked quietly. His voice was rough from disuse, like gravel shifting. Patricia met his gaze. "Because 3 months ago, you applied to be a foster parent. You're the only person in this county currently approved who doesn't already have a placement. And Riley needs somewhere to go." "I live off-grid," Marcus said. "No electricity, no internet, no television. I hunt my own food. I don't have a car that runs half the time. You really think that's appropriate for a child?" "Honestly," Patricia leaned back in her chair, "I don't know. But I've been doing this job for 18 years, and I've learned that sometimes the unconventional placements are the ones that work. Riley doesn't need normal. Normal hasn't worked. Riley needs someone who won't give up." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to meet the kid." 20 minutes later, Riley walked into the conference room like someone approaching a trap. Small for 9 years old, all sharp angles and defensive posture. Short dark hair that looked self-cut, probably with kitchen scissors. Clothes that didn't quite fit. A graphic t-shirt with a faded superhero logo and jeans rolled at the ankles. Sneakers held together with shoelaces that didn't match. But it was the eyes that struck Marcus, suspicious, guarded, old in a way no child's eyes should be. Riley stopped just inside the doorway, arms crossed. "You the new one?" "Depends," Marcus said. "You looking for a new one?" "Doesn't matter what I'm looking for. Never does." Patricia gestured to the chair. "Riley, this is Marcus Thorne. He lives out in the mountains. Thought maybe you two could talk." Riley didn't move. "You got other kids?" "No," Marcus said. "You got a wife?" "Not anymore." "You know how to cook?" "I can keep us from starving." Riley studied him for a long moment, then slowly walked to the chair and sat down, feet swinging above the floor. "You ever hit kids?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Patricia tensed, ready to intervene, but Marcus's expression didn't change. "No," he said simply, "and I won't start with you." Something flickered in Riley's eyes. Not trust, but maybe the faintest possibility of it. They sat in silence for a moment, sizing each other up like two animals deciding if the other was a threat. Finally, Riley asked, "What do you do all day out there?" "I study rocks. I track animals. I make sure I have enough firewood for winter, I think." "That's it?" "Sometimes I go weeks without talking to another person." Riley considered this. "That doesn't sound so bad." Marcus almost smiled. Almost. "No," he said quietly, "it doesn't." 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same social services office, listening to Patricia outline the terms of Riley's placement. Temporary, of course, 6 months initially. Regular check-ins, home visits, educational requirements, the list went on. But there was something else, something that made Patricia's expression tighten with worry. "There's one more thing," she said. "I got a call this morning from Riley's case manager. She's concerned about your plans." Marcus frowned. "What plans?" "You mentioned wanting to take Riley camping, extended camping, out in the backcountry." "I did," Marcus said. "It's what I do. Figured Riley should learn wilderness skills if we're going to be living out there." Patricia chose her words carefully. "Marcus, Riley has never been camping, has significant anxiety around new situations. And you're talking about going 20, 30 miles into the wilderness, away from any kind of emergency services. My supervisor thinks it's too risky. She's recommending against it." Marcus's jaw tightened. "How long has Riley been in the system?" 4 years. "And how many placements?" 7. "You know why they all failed?" Patricia didn't answer. "Because everyone keeps trying to fit Riley into boxes that don't work," Marcus said, his voice low but intense. "Traditional homes, traditional schools, traditional expectations. That kid doesn't need normal. Riley needs to know there's a place in the world where being different isn't wrong." "I understand that," Patricia said gently. "But taking a traumatized 9-year-old into the wilderness alone seems like a lot at once." Marcus stood, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "You asked me if I'd give up on Riley. I said no, I meant it. That camping trip isn't recreation. It's survival training. It's teaching Riley that the world isn't just social workers and foster homes and people who leave. It's mountains and rivers and skills you can trust because they don't change, because they don't abandon you." He paused, then added more softly, "And maybe it's teaching an old man that he's still capable of caring about something other than rocks." Patricia studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed. 3 weeks. That's the maximum I can approve without raising red flags. You have emergency communication equipment?" "Satellite phone, emergency beacon." "And you'll check in every 3 days?" "Every 2 if it makes you feel better." She made a note on her file. "This is probably the worst decision I've made all year." "Or the best," Marcus said. The news spread through Pinewood like wildfire through dry timber. By the next morning, everyone knew that crazy Marcus Thorne was taking that troubled foster kid up into the mountains. The gossip started at the diner, rolled through the feed store, and settled into every conversation at the Copper Creek bar. "That man's lost his mind," said Helen McCarthy, who ran the general store and knew everyone's business. "Taking a child up there where anything could happen." Heard the kid's got problems, added Tom Brewster, retired sheriff, sitting at his usual booth. Runs away from every home they're in. What's to stop Riley from running away up there and getting lost? That's if Marcus doesn't lose the kid himself, chimed in another voice. Man lives like a caveman, probably doesn't even remember how to take care of another human being. But there were a very few, who remembered Marcus differently, who remembered the professor who used to give talks at the high school about geology, who remembered the father who used to bring his son hiking, teaching him to identify minerals and read topographic maps, who remembered the man before the tragedy, before the isolation, before the world decided he was crazy. Margot Sullivan, the librarian who'd known Marcus for 30 years, heard the gossip and said nothing. She just remembered a man who'd checked out every book on child psychology in the library over the past month. A man who'd asked her quietly what 9-year-olds liked to read these days. That didn't sound like a man who'd lost his mind. That sounded like a man trying to find it again. The morning they left, Marcus loaded his ancient Ford pickup with supplies. The truck was a 1987 model, forest green beneath the rust and dents. It ran on hope and stubbornness, much like its owner. He packed methodically, checking each item twice. Tent, sleeping bags rated for mountain temperatures, cooking equipment, water filtration system, first aid kit comprehensive enough for a small hospital, emergency shelter, fire-starting materials, maps, compass, GPS unit, satellite phone, emergency beacon, then food, enough for 3 weeks, plus extra, freeze-dried meals, energy bars, dried fruit, nuts, fishing gear, water purification tablets. Riley watched from the porch of Marcus's cabin, backpack already on, ready to bolt if this turned out to be another trap disguised as opportunity. The kid had learned early that adults promised things they didn't deliver, that temporary placements ended without warning, that trust was a liability. Marcus walked over carrying a jacket. Gets cold at night up there, even in summer. Riley took the jacket without comment, examining it suspiciously like it might contain hidden strings attached. You ever been camping? Marcus asked. No. Scared? Riley's chin lifted defensively. No. You should be, Marcus said, which wasn't what Riley expected. The wilderness doesn't care about your feelings or your problems. It doesn't lie, but it doesn't forgive mistakes either. That's why I'm going to teach you how to survive it. Why? It was such a simple question, but it carried the weight of 4 years of abandonment, of 7 failed placements, of a childhood spent wondering why nobody wanted to keep them. Marcus crouched down to Riley's level, his weathered face serious. Because you deserve to know you're capable. Because the world's going to tell you a lot of things about who you are and what you can do, and most of it will be wrong. But if you can start a fire in the rain, if you can find north without a compass, if you can build a shelter that'll keep you alive, then you'll know something true about yourself. Something nobody can take away. Riley stared at him, searching for the lie, the angle, the moment when this would all fall apart. But Marcus just waited, patient as stone. Finally, Riley said, "Okay." They drove for 2 hours, winding deeper into the mountains. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt tracks barely wide enough for the truck. They passed through forests of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, crossed streams running clear and cold with snowmelt, climbed higher until the air thinned and the world opened up into vast stretches of wilderness that seemed to go on forever. Riley pressed against the window, watching the landscape change. The kid had grown up in cities and suburbs, in foster homes with fenced yards and rules about staying where adults could see you. This was different. This was wild in a way that made Riley's chest feel tight with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement. "Where are we going?" Riley asked. Marcus glanced over. "Place I used to go with my son, back before." "Before what?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, hands steady on the wheel. "Before I lost him." Riley absorbed this, then asked carefully, "Did he run away?" "No," Marcus said, his voice rough. "He died. Hiking accident 15 years ago. He was 14. The truck cab fell silent, except for the engine's rumble and the crunch of tires on dirt. Riley wanted to ask more but didn't know how, didn't know if it was allowed. Every foster home had different rules about what you could ask, what you could say, what was safe. Finally, Marcus spoke again. His name was Daniel. He loved the mountains more than anything, used to say he could hear them breathing. "Can you?" Marcus almost smiled. "Sometimes, when it's quiet enough." They parked at a trailhead that didn't look like much, just a gap in the trees and a weathered wooden sign so faded you couldn't read it anymore. Marcus killed the engine, and the silence rushed in, thick and complete. No traffic, no voices, no electronic hum, just wind moving through pine needles and the distant sound of water over rocks. "This is it," Marcus said. "From here we walk." It took them 45 minutes to get everything packed and sorted. Marcus distributed the weight carefully, taking the heavier items himself, but making sure Riley carried a fair share. Not too much to be cruel, but enough to matter. Enough to feel like a real part of this. "First rule," Marcus said, adjusting Riley's pack straps. "We stay together, always. I don't care if you see the most interesting thing in the world 10 feet off the trail. You tell me first." "Okay." "Second rule, if you feel weird about anything, tired, dizzy, too hot, too cold, you tell me immediately. Pride's not worth dying for." "Okay." "Third rule, you listen when I'm teaching you. I'm not going to repeat myself 50 times. The wilderness won't either." Riley nodded, more serious now. Marcus studied the kid for a moment, then shouldered his own pack. "Let's go." The trail started easy, a gentle incline through dense forest. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, illuminating dust motes and pine pollen floating in the air. The ground was soft with decades of fallen needles. Their footsteps made almost no sound. For the first hour, they hiked in silence. Marcus set a steady pace, not too fast, checking every few minutes to make sure Riley was keeping up. The kid was small but determined, jaw set, refusing to show weakness. Around noon, they stopped at a clearing beside a creek. Marcus showed Riley how to use the water filter, explaining the mechanics patiently. How to identify good water sources versus ones that would make you sick. How to purify in an emergency with nothing but fire and time. Riley listened, absorbing every word like this might be a test later. And maybe it was. Maybe everything in life was a test, and Riley had been failing for 4 years straight. They ate energy bars and dried fruit, sitting on sun-warmed rocks. Marcus pulled out a topographic map and showed Riley where they were, how to read the contour lines, how to calculate distance and elevation gain. "We're here," he said, pointing to a spot marked in pencil. "We're going here." His finger moved to a location deeper in the wilderness. "About 20 miles total. Take us 3 days at this pace." Riley studied the map seriously. "What's out there?" Marcus hesitated, then said, "Something I've been looking for a long time." "What kind of something?" "The kind that might prove I wasn't crazy after all." They hiked another 4 hours before Marcus called for camp. The sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. They were in a meadow ringed by pines, with a small stream running along one edge. "Perfect," Marcus explained. "Water source, open ground for tent, trees for shelter if weather turned." He taught Riley how to set up the tent, not just doing it himself, but making the kid work through each step. How to choose the flattest ground. How to stake properly so wind wouldn't rip everything apart in the night. How to create a vestibule for gear. Then came fire building. Marcus dumped out a small pile of kindling and larger wood. "Show me what you'd do." Riley stared at it, overwhelmed. "I don't know. Guess." Hesitantly, Riley stacked some of the larger pieces, then tried to light it with a match Marcus handed over. Nothing happened except a lot of smoke and one burned finger. "Why didn't it work?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. Think about it. Fire needs 3 things. What are they?" Riley thought hard, trying to remember something from school, from TV, from anywhere. Wood? That's fuel. What else? Air? Oxygen, yes, and? I don't know. Heat. You need all 3. Fuel, Oxygen, heat. You tried to light big wood with a tiny flame. It's like trying to cook a turkey with a candle. You need to start small, build up. Marcus knelt beside the pile and reorganized it, narrating as he worked. Tinder first, the smallest, driest stuff. Kindling next, pencil-sized, then finger-sized, then wrist-sized. You build a structure that lets air flow but concentrates heat, like this. He demonstrated, his scarred hands moving with practiced efficiency. Within 2 minutes, flames crackled and grew. Riley watched, mesmerized. "Now you try," Marcus said, killing the fire and scattering the materials. "From the beginning." It took Riley 4 attempts and 30 minutes, but eventually a small, proud fire burned in the ring of stones. The kid's face lit up with something that looked like joy, or maybe just surprised competence. "Good," Marcus said simply. But the word carried weight, approval Riley rarely heard. As darkness fell and stars emerged in impossible numbers, they sat by the fire eating freeze-dried meals that tasted better than they had any right to after a long day of hiking. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun disappeared, and Riley huddled in the oversized jacket Marcus had provided, watching flames dance against the black. "Marcus?" Riley asked quietly. "Yeah. Why do you really want to foster someone?" Marcus poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. He was quiet for so long Riley thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "After Daniel died, I stopped living. I just existed. Went through motions. Eventually, I couldn't even do that anymore. Lost my job, my marriage, everything. Ended up out here because the only thing that didn't hurt was being alone." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But alone isn't the same as healing. Took me 15 years to figure that out. Took a social worker asking me a question I didn't expect. She said, 'You've spent 15 years running from what you lost. What if you spent the next 15 giving someone what you wish you could have given your son?'" Riley absorbed this, staring into the flames. "I'm not your son." "No," Marcus agreed. "You're not. You're Riley. And Riley deserves someone who shows up, who doesn't leave, who teaches you that you're worth more than a system number and a case file." The fire crackled between them. Above, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, so bright out here, away from civilization, that it seemed impossible. Finally, Riley said, "Everyone leaves eventually." "Yeah," Marcus said, "most people do, but I'm not most people." "How do I know that?" "You don't. Not yet. That's why we're out here. So you can learn." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, 2 damaged people finding something like peace in the wilderness darkness. Eventually, Marcus banked the fire and sent Riley to the tent. He stayed outside a while longer, watching the embers fade, thinking about Daniel, about choices, about second chances that came disguised as a 9-year-old kid who trusted nothing and no one. The next morning started before sunrise. Marcus woke Riley gently, showing the kid how the world looked in that blue hour before dawn when everything held its breath. They boiled water for instant oatmeal, packed up camp with increasing efficiency, and were on the trail as the first light touched the mountain peaks. The second day's hiking was harder. The trail climbed steeply, switchbacking up a ridge that seemed to go on forever. Riley struggled but refused to complain, which Marcus respected even as he watched carefully for signs of real distress versus simple discomfort. There was a difference, and knowing it could save a life. Around midday, as they crested the ridge, Riley stopped abruptly. "What's that?" Marcus followed the kid's gaze to an outcropping of rock about 50 yards off the trail. The formation was unusual, angular in a way that natural weathering didn't typically produce, and there, catching the sunlight, was a metallic glint that made Marcus's breath catch. "Stay here," he said, but Riley was already scrambling toward it. "Riley, stop!" The kid froze at the sharp command in Marcus's voice. He rarely raised it, so when he did, it carried authority. "I said stay together, always, remember?" Riley nodded sheepishly and waited as Marcus approached, then walked beside him toward the outcropping. As they got closer, Marcus's hands began to shake slightly, something he couldn't quite control. This formation, This specific angular pattern, he'd seen it before, 25 years ago in theoretical models, in research that everyone said was impossible. He knelt at the base of the outcrop, pulling a small hammer and hand lens from his pack. Riley watched as Marcus chipped away a small sample, examined it closely, then looked up at the larger formation with an expression the kid couldn't read. "What is it?" Riley asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He took more samples, photographed the formation from multiple angles, pulled out a battered notebook and sketched quickly. His breathing had changed, faster, shallower. "Marcus, 25 years ago," he said quietly, still working, "I published a theory about rare earth mineral deposits in this mountain range. I said there was evidence of a formation type that shouldn't exist here, couldn't exist here according to conventional geology. I had preliminary data, some samples, theoretical models. I presented it at a conference." He paused, his jaw tight. They laughed. Colleagues I respected, people I'd worked with for years. They called it pseudoscience, said I was seeing patterns that didn't exist, that I'd gone off the deep end. My funding was pulled. Universities stopped returning my calls. Within a year, I was unemployable in my field. "But you were right," Riley asked, looking at the rock formation with new eyes. "I thought I was. But without proof, without being able to access the areas I needed to study, I couldn't confirm it. And after Daniel died, I stopped caring. Figured maybe they were right. Maybe I had lost my mind. And now?" Marcus finally looked at Riley, and the kid saw something in those weathered eyes that looked almost like hope, fragile and tentative. "Now I'm thinking maybe I should have kept looking." They made camp earlier than planned, Marcus too distracted by the discovery to push further. He spent the evening examining his samples, comparing them to faded notes in journals he'd carried for decades, muttering calculations under his breath. Riley practiced fire building again, this time succeeding on the second attempt. Built confidence brick by brick, skill by skill. As the sun set and they sat by the fire, Riley asked, "If you prove you were right, what happens?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me doesn't care anymore about proving them wrong. That man who needed their approval died a long time ago." "Then why does this matter?" It was a perceptive question, the kind that cut through to truth. Marcus considered it carefully. "Because for 15 years, I've believed I couldn't trust my own judgment about anything important. That I'd lost my son because I made the wrong call. That I'd destroyed my career because I couldn't see reality clearly. But if this is real, if what I'm seeing here is actually what I think it is, then maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I just see things others don't." He looked at Riley. "Kind of like you." "What do you mean?" 7 placements, right? And every single one failed. System says you're the problem, you're difficult, you don't fit. But maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe you just need something different than what they keep trying to give you." Riley poked at the fire, processing this. "You think we're the same?" "I think we're both tired of being told we're wrong for being who we are." The night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The sound sent a small shiver through Riley, but it wasn't fear exactly. It was the recognition of wild things calling to each other across the darkness. "Tomorrow," Marcus said, "we go deeper. There's something else I want to find, about 2 miles north of here. An area I mapped years ago but could never access because of private property restrictions. But we're beyond those boundaries now." "Is it safe?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Probably not. You still want to come?" Riley thought about the group home they'd be sent back to if this placement failed. Thought about social workers and case managers and people who looked at a file instead of a person. Thought about the alternative, hiking into the unknown with a man who talked to rocks and made fire like breathing. "Yeah," Riley said, "I do." "Good, get some sleep. Tomorrow gets interesting." As Riley crawled into the tent, Marcus stayed by the fire, turning the rock samples over in his scarred hands. The metallic glint caught the firelight, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite hope, not quite certainty. but something in between, fragile as new flame, that whispered, maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. In the darkness of the tent, Riley lay in the sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. For the first time in 4 years, the kid felt something unfamiliar. Not safety exactly, but the possibility of it. The chance that maybe this time would be different. Outside, Marcus made one final note in his journal before closing it. Tomorrow they would push deeper into the wilderness, following a theory everyone said was madness. He was dragging a traumatized 9-year-old into terrain that could kill them both. The whole town thought he'd lost his mind. Maybe they were right, or maybe, just maybe, the crazy ones were the people who'd stopped believing in second chances, both for mountains that held secrets and for 2 damaged souls learning to trust again. Marcus looked up at the stars, thought about Daniel, about choices made and choices still to come. Then he whispered into the darkness, "We're going to find it, son. Finally going to prove I wasn't wrong." And somewhere in the vast wilderness, in stone formations that shouldn't exist and mineral deposits worth hundreds of millions, the earth kept its secrets for one more night. The third morning arrived with mist so thick it felt like breathing clouds. Marcus woke before Riley, as usual, and sat outside the tent watching the white world emerge slowly from darkness. Somewhere beyond the fog, the sun was rising, but here in the high country, dawn came as gradual revelation rather than sudden light. He pulled out his old topographic maps, the kind printed on actual paper that couldn't lose battery or signal. They were marked with pencil notations going back 25 years, theories and calculations and locations he'd dreamed about accessing but never could. Until now. The area they were heading into today had been marked on these maps since 1998, labeled simply Anomaly Zone 3. Private timber company land back then, completely off limits to researchers without corporate permission. Permission Marcus had been denied repeatedly. But the timber company had gone bankrupt in 2006, and the land had reverted to federal wilderness designation. Technically accessible now, though so remote and difficult that almost no one bothered. Marcus traced the penciled route with one scarred finger. 2.3 miles northeast. Elevation gain of roughly 800 feet, terrain classified as difficult to extreme. And somewhere in that zone, if his calculations from a quarter century ago were correct, lay evidence of the largest rare earth mineral deposit ever discovered in North America. Worth, conservatively, $275 million, maybe more. Riley crawled out of the tent, hair sticking up in every direction, rubbing sleep from dark eyes. The kid had slept better last night, Marcus noticed. Less tossing, fewer nightmares. The wilderness had that effect sometimes, trading the anxiety of human spaces for the simpler fears of cold and weather and distance. "Morning," Riley mumbled. "Morning, oatmeal or granola?" "Do I have to choose now? It's too early for decisions." Marcus almost smiled. The kid's personality was emerging more each day, sarcastic and sharp beneath the defensive walls. "Oatmeal it is. Get the water boiling." They ate quickly, packed camp with increasing efficiency, and were moving by the time the mist started burning off. The trail, such as it was, disappeared entirely after the first mile. From here, they were navigating by compass and GPS, pushing through dense undergrowth and over fallen logs slick with moss. "Why isn't there a trail?" Riley asked, breathing hard as they climbed. "Because nobody comes here," Marcus said. "No views worth Instagram, no easy access, no reason for casual hikers, just rocks and trees and difficulty. So why are we here?" Marcus stopped, turned to face Riley. The kid deserved honesty, even if the truth sounded insane. "Because 25 years ago, I was a geologist working for a mining company. We were doing preliminary surveys of this mountain range, looking for commercial mineral deposits, copper mostly, maybe some silver." He pulled off his pack, dug out an old leather journal, flipped to pages filled with sketches and calculations. "I found something in the core samples that didn't make sense. Concentrations of neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, elements that shouldn't exist in these formations at these levels. Rare earth minerals worth more than gold, more than platinum. I started developing a theory about how they got here, about geological processes that conventional wisdom said were impossible. Riley studied the journal, not understanding the technical details but recognizing obsession in the careful handwriting. What happened? I presented my findings at the North American Geological Conference in Denver, 1999, stood in front of 300 colleagues and laid out my theory, showed my data, my models, my projections. Marcus's jaw tightened at the memory. They tore me apart, said the samples were contaminated, said my methodology was flawed, said I was seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. Were you? I don't know, Marcus admitted, the words heavy. That's the hell of it. After enough people tell you you're wrong, you start believing them, especially when you can't prove otherwise. They started hiking again, climbing steeper now. Riley struggled with the incline but didn't complain, just focused on breathing and moving forward. My funding got pulled, Marcus continued, his voice coming in bursts between breaths. No mining company wanted to back research that the academic community had rejected. My university said I was damaging their reputation. Within 6 months I was unemployable, lost everything. My wife left, took Daniel with her initially, though he came back to live with me later when he was 12. Why'd he come back? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Because he believed me. He was the only one who did. We spent 2 summers trying to access this area, trying to gather proof, but we could never get permission to be on the land. And then, his voice caught. Then one day we were hiking a different section, not even looking for minerals, just being together. He slipped on wet rock, fell 30 feet into a ravine, died instantly. Riley absorbed this, understanding now why Marcus moved through the wilderness with such careful attention, why every step was measured, every decision calculated. I'm sorry, Riley said quietly. Me too. Marcus stopped, checked his GPS coordinates against the map. We're close. Another half mile. They pushed through a dense thicket of mountain laurel, branches scraping against their packs and catching on their clothes. When they finally broke through to the other side, both stopped abruptly. The landscape had changed. The vegetation was different here, sparse and stunted in patterns that didn't match the surrounding forest. Trees that should have been 20 feet tall barely reached 6, their trunks twisted in odd configurations. The ground showed discoloration, patches of soil that ranged from rust red to pale grey to almost black. Marcus pulled out a small device from his pack, something that looked like a cross between a metal detector and a vintage radio. Riley watched as he powered it on, swept it slowly across the ground. What's that? Magnetometer? Measures magnetic field variations. Different minerals create different signatures. He watched the needle swing wildly. This is it. This is exactly what my models predicted. His hands were shaking again as he took soil samples, photographed the vegetation patterns, made notes in the journal. Riley wandered a few yards away, examining a boulder that seemed to shimmer strangely in the filtered sunlight. Marcus, this rock looks weird. He came over, knelt beside it, pulled out his hand lens. Even before magnification, he could see the telltale signs. Crystalline structures that caught light at unusual angles. Metallic inclusions that shouldn't be there. His heart hammered against his ribs. We need to go further, he said, voice tight with controlled excitement. There's something bigger here. I can feel it. They climbed for another 20 minutes, following the magnetic anomalies and visual clues only Marcus could read. The terrain became more difficult, near vertical in places, requiring careful hand-over-hand climbing. Marcus went first, testing each handhold, calling down instructions to Riley. And then they crested a ridge and found it. A stake. Wooden, weathered nearly to nothing, but unmistakable. Someone had driven it into the ground here long ago, marking a claim. Carved into the rotted wood in barely legible letters. J. Morrison Claim, Est 1892. Marcus stared at it like he was seeing a ghost. Someone else knew, he whispered. Over 100 years ago, someone else found this place. Riley touched the stake carefully, almost reverently. What happened to them? I don't know, but mining claims from that era, most of them were abandoned. Either they ran out of money, couldn't extract what they found, or died trying. Marcus pulled out his satellite phone, checked for signal. 1 bar, barely functional. He keyed in Patricia Moore's number for the scheduled check-in. The call took forever to connect, filled with static and dropped syllables. Patricia's voice came through in fragments. "Marcus, We're fine," he said loudly, hoping she could hear. "On schedule, everything's good." More static then. "Severe weather warning, mountains tonight, should consider—" The line died. Marcus tried calling back twice, but couldn't get a connection. He checked the emergency radio instead and caught the tail end of a weather broadcast. Severe thunderstorm warning for the high country, possibility of flash flooding, warnings to seek lower elevation. He looked at Riley, then at the ridgeline ahead where his theories said the main deposit should be. The sky was still clear, but in the mountains, that could change in minutes. "We should probably head back," Riley said, reading his expression. Marcus looked at the old claim stake, at the magnetic readings that confirmed everything he'd believed for 25 years, at the possibility of finally proving he wasn't wrong, wasn't crazy, wasn't broken. "One more day," he heard himself say. "Just one more day to see what's over that ridge." "You said the storm—" "I know what I said, but we're so close, Riley. 25 years I've been trying to get here. If we turn back now, I might never get another chance." Riley studied him carefully, seeing something desperate in the weathered face. "Is this about proving you were right, or about your son?" The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus sat down hard on a nearby rock, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know anymore. Maybe both. Daniel believed in me when no one else did, died before I could show him he was right to. If I find what I think is here, if I can prove the theory, then maybe his faith in me wasn't misplaced. Maybe I'm not the man who let everyone down." Riley was quiet for a long moment, then said something that sounded much older than 9 years. "Or maybe you're just scared that if you go back without finding it, you'll have to admit you dragged a kid out here for nothing, that you're still the crazy guy everyone thinks you are." Marcus flinched. The kid wasn't wrong. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "Maybe that too." They sat in silence, the old claim stake between them like a grave marker for someone's abandoned dreams. Finally, Riley spoke. "My mom left me at a fire station when I was 5, just walked away and never came back. I used to think if I could just be better, smarter, quieter, less trouble, she'd come find me. That if I was good enough, someone would want to keep me." Riley picked at a thread on the oversized jacket. "Took me 4 years to realize I was looking for proof of something that was never true, that I was worth keeping. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it's not about proving anything to people who already decided what they think." Marcus absorbed this, seeing himself reflected in a 9-year-old's hard-won wisdom. "So what's the right question?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Riley said honestly, "but I don't think we're going to find it in rocks." Marcus looked at the kid, really looked, and saw not a troubled foster placement, but a person who'd survived more emotional terrain than most adults ever had to navigate. Someone who understood that sometimes the thing you're searching for and the thing you actually need are completely different. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" Riley shrugged. 7 placements teaches you stuff. Marcus stood, made a decision. "Okay, we head back. You're right. This isn't worth risking." A sound stopped him. Distant but distinct. Running water. Not the gentle stream-over-rock sound they'd been hearing for days, but something deeper, more resonant. Underground water, maybe, or cavern echo. He turned slowly toward the sound, and that's when he saw it, partially hidden by vegetation, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. A mine entrance. Old, collapsed at the top, but definitely human-made. And above it, carved into the rock face, so weathered he almost missed it. J. Morrison, 1892, strike depth 40 feet. "Is that what I think it is?" Riley asked. Marcus was already moving toward it, all thoughts of storms and safety temporarily forgotten. The entrance was partially sealed by a rockfall, but there was a gap, maybe 3 feet wide, that descended into darkness. "We shouldn't go in there," Riley said, but without much conviction. The kid was curious too, Marcus could tell. Just a quick look. 5 minutes. I need to see what Morrison found. He pulled out his headlamp, clicked it on, and squeezed through the gap. Riley hesitated, then followed. The tunnel was surprisingly stable, shored up with timber beams that had somehow survived over a century. It sloped downward at a gentle angle, wide enough to walk upright. The walls showed pick marks, evidence of manual excavation before machinery existed to make the work easier. Marcus ran his fingers along the rock face, and even in the harsh LED light he could see it. Crystalline formations, metallic veining, concentrations that made his breath catch. "This is it," he whispered. "This is actually it." They moved deeper, Marcus taking samples every few feet, photographing everything. Riley stayed close, one hand on Marcus's pack, not quite scared but definitely aware they were somewhere humans hadn't been in over 100 years. The tunnel opened into a chamber after about 40 feet, just as the carving had indicated, and what they found there stole all the words from Marcus's vocabulary. The walls glittered, not metaphorically, but actually glittered, covered in crystalline formations that caught and refracted their headlamp beams into rainbow scatters of light. The ceiling arced overhead like a cathedral, natural stone shaped by water and time and geological forces into something almost beautiful. But it was the mineral deposits that made Marcus's knees weak. Veins of material running through the rock like lightning frozen in stone. Concentrations that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist according to everything conventional geology said was possible. Except here they were. "Is it worth a lot?" Riley asked quietly, voice echoing in the chamber. Marcus pulled out his calculation notebook, started estimating volume, grade, extraction costs, current market prices. His pencil scratched across paper while numbers piled up, each one more impossible than the last. "If I'm calculating this correctly," he said, voice shaking, "and if even 10% of what I'm seeing here extends deeper into the mountain, we're looking at the largest rare earth mineral deposit ever discovered in North America, worth somewhere between $200 million and $300 million. Riley was quiet, processing numbers too big to really comprehend. "So you were right. They were all wrong. And you were right." What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. "Yeah," Marcus said, but the word came out hollow. He sat down on the stone floor, surrounded by proof of everything he'd believed for 25 years, and felt nothing like the vindication he'd expected. Just tired. Just old. "What's wrong?" Riley asked, sitting beside him. "I spent 15 years thinking if I could just prove this, everything would be okay. That it would bring Daniel back somehow, or fix my marriage, or make the people who mocked me apologize. But he's still gone. She's still gone. And proving I was right doesn't change any of that." The chamber was silent except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. "Then why does it matter?" Riley asked. Marcus thought about that. Maybe it doesn't. Or maybe it matters differently than I thought. Not as proof for them, but as proof for me. That I can still trust my own judgment. That I'm capable of seeing truth even when everyone says I'm wrong. He looked at Riley. "Kind of like you figuring out that your worth isn't dependent on whether your mum came back or foster families keep you." "I haven't figured that out yet," Riley admitted. "Neither have I," Marcus said. "But maybe we're both getting closer." They sat together in the glittering chamber while their headlamps slowly dimmed, and somewhere above them, storm clouds began gathering over the mountains. Riley stood, walked to the far wall, examining something. "Marcus, there's something here." He came over, shone his light where Riley pointed. A small alcove, natural or carved, he couldn't tell. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived the decades, was a leather-bound book. Marcus lifted it carefully, afraid it might disintegrate at his touch. But the oilcloth had done its job, and the book inside was remarkably preserved. He opened it gently. Journal of James Morrison. The first page read in elegant script. Year of our Lord, 1892. They sat together, and Marcus read aloud by headlamp light. June 15th. Struck formation at 38 feet. Unlike any mineral structure documented. Sent samples to assay office in Helena. Results impossible. They claim contamination, demand new samples. I know what I have found. Fortune beyond measure if extraction proves feasible. Marcus flipped pages, reading entries that charted Morrison's growing excitement and frustration. Assay officers that questioned his samples. Partners who abandoned him. Family members who called him obsessed. August 23rd. Received letter from Colorado School of Mines. Professor Martin states my findings contradict established geological principles and suggests I have allowed prospecting fever to cloud scientific judgment, but I have seen it with my own eyes. I know the truth. Riley listened as Marcus's voice grew quieter, recognizing his own story in words written over 100 years ago. October 7th. Winter approaching. Must abandon site until spring. Have sealed entrance against weather and claim jumpers. Will return with proper equipment and investors who possess vision to see beyond conventional wisdom. The final entry was dated November 3rd, 1892. Helena physicians confirm consumption diagnosis, unlikely to survive winter. My discovery dies with me, as I have no heir and partners who believed have all departed. Perhaps God's will that such wealth remain hidden. Perhaps some secrets the earth keeps for good reason. To whoever finds this, if anyone ever does, I was not mad. The minerals are real. The formation exists. I simply ran out of time to prove it. Marcus closed the journal gently, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. He was like you, Riley finally said. Everyone thought he was crazy, but he wasn't. No, Marcus agreed. He just saw something others couldn't, and died before he could prove it. Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now. The storm was here. We need to move, Marcus said, standing. This chamber floods in heavy rain, and we're about to get a lot of it. They gathered their gear quickly, Marcus pocketing samples and Morrison's journal. As they moved back toward the entrance, rain began hammering the mountain above them. They could hear it even through 40 feet of rock, a roar like freight trains. At the tunnel entrance, they stopped. The gap they'd squeezed through was now partially blocked by fresh rockfall from the rain. They could still get out, but barely, and it was getting worse by the second. Go, Marcus said, pushing Riley toward the opening. Quick, before it closes completely. Riley scrambled through, scraping arms and legs on the rough stone. Marcus followed, his pack catching on a rock. He twisted, yanked, and something gave way. Not the pack, but the rockfall above. A grinding sound filled the air. Run! Marcus shouted. They sprinted away from the mine entrance as tons of rock collapsed behind them, sealing the tunnel completely. By the time they stopped, breathing hard, the entrance had vanished entirely beneath fresh debris. Rain poured down in sheets now, visibility near zero. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the ground. They were exposed on the ridge, in the worst possible place during a mountain storm. There! Riley pointed to an overhang about 30 yards away, barely visible through the rain. They made it to shelter just as hail began mixing with the rain, ice chunks the size of marbles bouncing off the rocks around them. They huddled together under the shallow overhang, soaked and shivering despite their rain gear. Marcus pulled out the satellite phone. No signal. He tried the emergency radio, got nothing but static. They were cut off, isolated, and the town had no idea where they were. Are we going to die? Riley asked, not hysterically, just matter of fact. A kid who'd learned that bad things happened whether you panicked or not. No, Marcus said firmly. We wait out the storm, then we head to lower elevation. We have shelter, food, water. We'll be fine. The radio crackled suddenly, fragments of transmission breaking through the static. Search and rescue, missing hikers, Thorne and child, last known, 3 days. Marcus and Riley looked at each other. They think we're lost, Riley said. We are lost, Marcus pointed out, just not the way they think. More static then. Helicopter search, weather clears, area last reported. If search and rescue came, they'd find them. Marcus would have to explain where they'd been, what they'd found. And then what? News would spread. Mining companies would move in. This whole area would be transformed from wilderness into industrial site. The secret Morrison had kept for over a century would be revealed, and Marcus would have the vindication he'd sought for 25 years. But at what cost? He looked at Riley, huddled under the overhang with rainwater running down scared young features. Looked at the mountains around them, wild and untouched. Thought about Daniel, who'd loved this wilderness for itself, not for what could be extracted from it. And Marcus realized something he probably should have understood 15 years ago. Some things were more valuable left hidden. Some secrets weren't meant to prove anything to anyone. "What are we going to do?" Riley asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. The storm raged around them while he held the satellite phone and Morrison's journal, 130 years of obsession and loss, and the desperate need to be right heavy in his hands. Finally, he made his choice. "We're going to survive this storm," he said quietly. "And then we're going to go home. Together." "What about the mine? The minerals? Proving you were right?" Marcus looked at the sealed entrance, already disappearing under fresh rockfall and running water, nature reclaiming her secrets. "I was right," he said. "That's enough. I don't need the world to know it anymore." The rain began to ease slightly, the worst of the storm passing. In the distance, through breaks in the clouds, they could see the valley below where civilization waited, where social workers and townspeople and normal life continued, unaware that two people they'd written off as crazy and troubled had just found and willingly walked away from a fortune. Marcus started to prepare their emergency shelter for the night, but Riley grabbed his arm. "Morrison's journal. Can I see it again?" Marcus handed it over, and Riley flipped to the final entry, reading by the fading stormlight. "He says maybe some secrets the Earth keeps for good reason," Riley read aloud. "Do you think that's true?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that sometimes finding something isn't the same as needing to possess it. Sometimes knowing it exists is enough." They made camp under the overhang as the storm cleared and stars began appearing in patches of visible sky. Tomorrow they'd begin the hike back to civilization, to explanations and questions and a world that thought they'd been lost. But tonight, they were exactly where they needed to be. Two people who'd been called crazy and damaged, who'd found something worth millions and chosen something worth more. Not vindication or wealth or proof for skeptics who'd never believe anyway. They'd chosen each other, chosen trust over treasure, chosen the kind of richness that had nothing to do with what could be extracted from the earth and everything to do with what could be built between two people who understood what it meant to be dismissed by a world that couldn't see their value. Marcus looked at Riley, sleeping now despite the damp and cold, and knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Not the one that proved anything to anyone, just the one that felt true. And sometimes that was the only proof that mattered. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and impossibly quiet. Marcus woke to find Riley already awake, sitting at the edge of the overhang, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. The kid's hair was still damp from yesterday's rain, sticking up at odd angles, but there was something different in the small shoulders, less hunched, less defensive. "Morning," Marcus said quietly, not wanting to break the spell of peace. "It's beautiful," Riley said, and there was wonder in the young voice that hadn't been there a week ago. They ate a cold breakfast, granola bars and trail mix while planning the descent. The storm had made the terrain even more dangerous, rocks slick with moisture, trails turned to mud. It would take them 2 full days to get back to the truck, maybe 3 if they encountered more rockfall. Marcus checked the satellite phone. Still no signal. The emergency beacon sat in his pack, untouched. He could activate it, bring rescue helicopters and questions and explanations. Or they could walk out on their own terms, two people who'd been exactly where they meant to be all along. He chose the latter. They'd been hiking for about 3 hours, making slow progress down the treacherous slope, when Riley stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" Marcus listened. Through the forest sounds came something mechanical, rhythmic. Helicopter rotors. "Search and rescue," he said, stomach tightening. "They're looking for us." The helicopter appeared over the ridge moments later, a bright orange and white bird against the blue sky. It circled once, twice, and Marcus knew they'd been spotted. He pulled out the satellite phone and this time got a signal immediately. "This is Marcus Thorne," he said when the dispatcher answered. "We're fine. Repeat, we are fine. Weather delayed us, but we're hiking out now." The voice on the other end was sharp with relief and anger. "Mr. Thorne, you were reported missing. We've had teams searching for 2 days. What is your exact location?" Marcus provided GPS coordinates and watched the helicopter descend to a clearing about 50 yards away. 2 rangers emerged, followed by someone he recognized even at a distance. Patricia Moore. The social worker's face was a mixture of relief and fury as she approached. "Marcus Thorne, what the hell were you thinking? We thought you were dead, both of you." "We got caught in the storm," Marcus said calmly. "Found shelter, waited it out. We were never in danger." "Never in danger?" Patricia's voice rose. "You took a 9-year-old child 20 miles into the wilderness during severe weather warnings. Do you have any idea what kind of position this puts me in? What it looks like?" Riley stepped forward. "We were fine. Marcus knew what he was doing." "That's not the point," Patricia said, but her voice softened when she looked at Riley. "Honey, we were worried. The whole town was worried." One of the rangers, a young man with a clipboard, was examining Marcus with professional assessment. "You're both physically okay? No injuries, no illness?" "We're fine," Marcus confirmed. "We'll need to fly you both out. Get you checked by medical, file incident reports." "That's not necessary. We can walk out." "It's protocol, sir. Non-negotiable." The helicopter ride back was tense and loud. Riley pressed against the window, watching the wilderness shrink beneath them, the mountains that had felt so vast and isolating reduced to topographic features on a map. Marcus sat in silence, one hand gripping his pack that contained Morrison's journal and the mineral samples that could prove everything or destroy everything, depending on how you looked at it. They landed at a staging area where emergency vehicles waited. Paramedics checked them over despite Marcus's protests, pronouncing them dehydrated but otherwise healthy. And then came the questions. Sheriff Tom Brewster, the retired lawman who still carried authority in Pinewood, approached with a stern expression. "Marcus, we need to talk about what happened out there." "We went camping. Got delayed by weather, that's all." "That's all?" Tom's eyebrows rose. "We had reports you were taking that child into dangerous terrain, that you were being reckless." "Reports from who?" "Concerned citizens, people who care about that kid's welfare." Marcus glanced at Patricia, who looked uncomfortable. "You're saying I endangered Riley?" "I'm saying it looks bad, Marcus, real bad. And there are people asking questions about whether you should be fostering anyone." The ride back to town was silent. Patricia drove her county vehicle with Riley in the back seat and Marcus in front, all of them lost in their own thoughts. When they pulled up to Marcus's cabin, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, townspeople, people Marcus barely knew. Helen McCarthy from the general store was there, arms crossed. "Glad to see you're alive, Marcus. We were all real worried." Her tone suggested otherwise. That evening, after Patricia had left with promises to be in touch soon and warnings to stay available, Marcus and Riley sat on the cabin porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar colors, but everything felt different now, changed. "They're going to take me away, aren't they?" Riley asked quietly. Marcus wanted to lie, to offer reassurance he wasn't sure he could back up, but the kid deserved honesty. They might try. Because of the camping trip? Because people see what they expect to see. They expect me to be crazy, to make bad decisions. They expect you to be troubled, to need protection from people like me. Riley was quiet for a moment. "What do we do?" Marcus pulled the samples from his pack, held them up to the fading light. The crystalline structures caught and fractured the sunset into tiny rainbows. "I don't know. I thought walking away from the mine was the right choice, but maybe there's another way." "What do you mean?" If these samples prove what I think they prove, they establish financial security for both of us. Makes me look less like a crazy hermit and more like someone who knows what he's doing. Might be enough to convince social services I'm stable. So you'd reveal the discovery, even though you said you didn't need to prove anything? Marcus looked at Riley, at this kid who'd learned to read adult motivations through 7 failed placements and 4 years of broken promises. I don't need to prove anything for me anymore. But if it means keeping you, then yeah. I'll prove whatever they need to see. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 3 days later. Marcus spent that time carefully documenting everything. He photographed the samples from every angle, ran preliminary tests with equipment borrowed from the high school science lab, calculated estimates and projections, and he made calls to people he hadn't spoken to in 25 years. Dr. Catherine Wells had been a colleague once, a fellow geologist who'd attended that disastrous conference in 1999. She'd been one of the few who hadn't openly mocked his theories, just quietly distanced herself from the controversy. When Marcus called her now, there was a long pause before she spoke. Marcus Thorne, I honestly never thought I'd hear from you again. I need a favor, Catherine, a professional assessment of some samples. What kind of samples? The kind that prove I wasn't wrong 25 years ago. Another pause. Marcus, I don't know if I'm the right person. You're the only person who didn't call me a fraud to my face. That makes you the right person. She agreed to drive up from Missoula, promising nothing except to look at what he'd found with objective eyes. The town hall was packed. Seemed like everyone in Pinewood had shown up, drawn by gossip and concern, and the kind of drama small towns fed on like oxygen. Marcus sat in the front row with Riley beside him, both of them cleaned up, but still carrying the wilderness on them in ways soap couldn't wash away. Patricia Moore stood before the crowd, her professional demeanor barely masking discomfort. We're here to discuss the incident involving Marcus Thorne and Riley Connors, and to address community concerns about the foster placement. Helen McCarthy was first to speak, standing with the confidence of someone who believed her opinions carried weight. I think we all agree Marcus means well, but taking a child into the wilderness during a storm warning shows poor judgment. That child could have died. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. We weren't in danger, Riley said loudly, standing up. Marcus taught me how to stay safe, how to build shelter and find water and survive. Nobody else ever taught me anything useful. Sit down, honey, Helen said in that condescending tone adults use with children they don't take seriously. The grown-ups are talking. No, Riley's voice was small but firm. You're talking about me like I'm not here, like I don't get a say, but I do. And I'm saying Marcus didn't put me in danger. He saved me. Marcus put a hand on Riley's shoulder, gentle pressure that said, both thank you and it's okay. What Riley's trying to say is that sometimes safety isn't about avoiding all risk. It's about learning how to handle risk when it comes. Tom Brewster stood. That's real philosophical, Marcus, but it doesn't change facts. You took a child into remote wilderness, ignored weather warnings, and had to be rescued. That's not good judgment. We didn't need rescuing, Marcus said. We were hiking out when the helicopter found us. Only because the storm delayed you. Marcus took a breath, making a decision. He reached into his pack and pulled out the samples, held them up so the overhead lights caught the crystalline structures and made them shimmer. I took Riley into those mountains to teach wilderness survival, yes, but also because I was following research I'd abandoned 25 years ago. Research that everyone in the scientific community said was impossible. He set the samples on the table in front of him. These are rare earth mineral samples collected from a site I theorized about in 1999. A site that, according to preliminary analysis, contains one of the largest deposits of neodymium, dysprosium, and other rare earth elements ever discovered in North America. The room went silent. I've asked Dr. Catherine Wells, professor of geology at the University of Montana, to provide independent verification. She's on her way here now. Helen found her voice first. You're saying you found valuable minerals? That's your excuse for endangering a child? I'm saying I was right. 25 years ago, when everyone called me crazy, when I lost my career and my reputation, I was right, and this time I have proof. The doors at the back of the hall opened, and Catherine Wells walked in carrying a professional equipment case. She was in her early 60s now, grey-haired and carrying the authority of 3 decades in academia. She walked to the front, gave Marcus a long look, then examined the samples he'd laid out. The room watched in absolute silence as she used a hand lens, took measurements, made notes. Finally, she looked up. "Where did you get these?" "Federal wilderness land, legally accessed, GPS coordinates documented." Catherine set down her tools and faced the crowd. "I'm Dr. Catherine Wells, Geology Department Chair at the University of Montana. I've spent my career studying mineral formations, and what Marcus has shown me tonight is extraordinary. These samples indicate rare earth concentrations at commercial grade. If the deposit is as extensive as preliminary data suggests, we're looking at a find worth potentially hundreds of millions of dollars." The room erupted. People talking over each other, questions flying, disbelief and excitement mixing into chaos. Patricia Moore stood, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. Marcus Thorne wasn't the crazy hermit who'd endangered a child. He was the vindicated scientist who'd been right all along. But Marcus wasn't paying attention to the crowd. He was watching Riley, who looked overwhelmed by the noise and attention. He stood, placed himself between the kid and the crowd. "That's enough," he said quietly. But something in his voice cut through the chaos. This meeting was supposed to be about Riley's welfare. Not my discovery, not mineral rights, not anything except whether a 9-year-old child is safe and cared for. He turned to Patricia. "So let's talk about that. What do you need to see to be convinced Riley should stay with me?" Patricia looked flustered, caught between protocol and the fact that the dynamic had completely changed. "Marcus, this is complicated. There are procedures, evaluations. I'm asking what you need to see, specifically." She took a breath. "Stable housing, steady income, evidence that you can provide for a child's needs, education, healthcare, emotional support, and no more risky decisions that put Riley in potential danger." "Done," Marcus said. "The housing is stable. I own it outright. Income will no longer be an issue given this discovery. Riley's been getting better education in 3 weeks with me than in 4 years in the system, learning practical skills and critical thinking. And I will make every decision with Riley's safety as the first priority." "It's not that simple." Riley stood again. "Can I say something?" Patricia nodded. "I know I'm just a kid and I'm supposed to do what adults decide, but I've been in 7 homes in 4 years. Some of them were nice houses with nice people who said nice things, but none of them wanted me. Not really. I was just another placement, another check, another kid to manage." Riley's voice shook but didn't break. "Marcus is the first person who chose me. Not because he had to, not because he was getting paid, but because he actually wants me there. And that matters more than anything else." The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Uncomfortable, confronted with truths people didn't want to acknowledge. An older woman Marcus didn't recognize stood up. "I'd like to say something. My name is Margot Sullivan. I'm the town librarian, and I've known Marcus for 30 years. When his son died, we all watched him break apart, watched him isolate, retreat, give up on everything except surviving. But 3 months ago, he came to the library asking about child psychology books, about what 9-year-olds need, what trauma does to kids, how to help someone heal." She looked directly at Patricia. "That doesn't sound like someone making reckless decisions. That sounds like someone preparing to be exactly what Riley needs." Others began standing, speaking. A teacher who remembered Marcus giving talks to students. A former neighbor who recalled him as a devoted father. Even Tom Brewster admitted grudgingly that Marcus had always been skilled in wilderness survival and probably had kept Riley safer than most people could have. The tide was turning, but Marcus knew it wasn't over. He'd still face formal evaluations, home visits, scrutiny, but for the first time, he felt like they might actually have a chance. The meeting dispersed eventually, people filing out in clusters of excited conversation about mineral deposits and property values and what this meant for Pinewood. Marcus and Riley sat alone in the hall afterward, exhausted. "What happens now?" Riley asked. "Now we deal with two kinds of chaos," Marcus said. "The social services kind and the mining company kind. Both are going to be complicated." "Which one's worse?" Marcus considered. "Honestly, I'd rather face a custody hearing than mineral rights lawyers." Riley almost smiled. "Are we going to be rich?" "Maybe, if we handle this right, but money doesn't fix everything." "Would fix some things, though." "Yeah," Marcus admitted. "It would." The news spread faster than Marcus had anticipated. By the next morning, his satellite phone was ringing constantly. Mining company representatives, lawyers, journalists, curiosity seekers. He stopped answering after the 10th call. Catherine Wells returned with a full team of graduate students and proper testing equipment. They spent 3 days running analyses while Marcus and Riley watched from a distance. When she finally presented her findings, her professional demeanor couldn't quite hide excitement. "Marcus, this is the find of a lifetime. Rare earth concentrations at levels I've never seen outside of China. If you can establish clear mineral rights and develop a responsible extraction plan, you're looking at a deposit worth approximately $275 million, possibly more." The number hung in the air between them. "That's more than I calculated," Marcus said quietly. "Your original theory was conservative. The actual concentrations exceed your projections by roughly 30%. Marcus sat down heavily. $275 million, enough to secure Riley's future forever. Enough to prove every person who'd called him crazy was wrong. Enough to resurrect a career, rebuild a reputation, reclaim everything he'd lost. And enough to destroy the wilderness that had saved him when human civilization had failed. "What are you thinking?" Catherine asked. "I'm thinking I spent 25 years wanting vindication. And now that I have it, I'm not sure what to do with it." That evening, representatives from 3 different mining companies showed up at Marcus's cabin uninvited. They brought contracts, promises, projections. Numbers that made Riley's eyes go wide. A man in an expensive suit from TerraCore Mining offered $15 million up front for the rights, with ongoing royalties. "You'd never have to work again, Mr. Thorne. Could give that kid every advantage." Another, from Summit Extraction, offered $20 million and promised environmentally responsible development. A third, representing a Chinese consortium, hinted at numbers north of $40 million if Marcus was willing to negotiate exclusively. Marcus listened to them all politely, then asked them to leave. "You're making a mistake," the TerraCore representative said. "We're offering you financial security, a legacy for your foster child." "My foster child has a name," Marcus said, "and the legacy I'm building doesn't require strip mining a mountain." After they left, Riley asked the question Marcus had been wrestling with since Catherine confirmed his findings. "Are you going to sell the rights?" "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to. Wants to set you up for life, make sure you never have to worry about money or security. But another part remembers why I loved those mountains in the first place. Because they were untouched, wild. Exactly what I needed when the human world had used me up." "So don't sell," Riley said simply. "It's not that easy. The minerals are valuable, yes, but they're also useful. Rare earth elements go into electronics, renewable energy technology, medical equipment. There's an argument that developing the site responsibly could do more good than leaving it locked away." Riley thought about this, then said something wise beyond years. Morrison didn't develop it, and he knew it was there for over 100 years ago. Maybe he had reasons. Marcus pulled out Morrison's journal, read the final entry again. Perhaps some secrets the earth keeps for good reason. Do you think he was right? "I think he understood something I'm just learning. That finding something and exploiting it are different choices. That maybe the real discovery isn't the minerals but what they teach us about ourselves." The custody evaluation was scheduled for the following week. Patricia Moore conducted it personally, spending 2 full days at Marcus's cabin, observing, interviewing, assessing. She watched him teach Riley wilderness skills, listened to them discuss everything from geology to why people make the choices they do. Saw the careful way Marcus ensured Riley had space to be a kid while also teaching responsibility. On the second day, she sat down with Riley privately. "Tell me honestly, do you feel safe here?" "Safer than anywhere I've ever been." "Even during the camping trip?" "Especially then. Because Marcus didn't just keep me physically safe, he made me feel like I mattered, like what I thought and felt was important." Patricia made notes, her expression unreadable. "And if I recommended you stay here permanently, if Marcus pursued adoption, would you want that?" Riley's answer was immediate. "Yes." The formal hearing was held 2 weeks later in county court. Marcus sat at a table with a lawyer Catherine Wells had recommended, someone experienced in both custody law and mineral rights. Riley sat beside Patricia in the gallery, small and serious in clothes that finally fit properly, purchased with money from Marcus's first consulting fee from a geology firm that wanted his expertise. The opposition, such as it was, came from the state's child welfare advocate who raised concerns about stability, about Marcus's history of isolation, about the unconventional nature of the placement. But Marcus's lawyer presented evidence systematically. Home evaluation reports showing a safe, clean environment. Educational assessments demonstrating Riley's dramatic improvement in learning. Psychological evaluations indicating positive emotional development. Letters from community members, even former skeptics, attesting to Marcus's dedication. And then Riley testified. The judge, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Huang, asked Riley directly, "Do you understand what adoption means? That it would make Marcus legally your parent?" "Yes, ma'am." "And is that something you want?" Riley looked at Marcus, then back at the judge. "For the first time in my life, someone chose me because they wanted me, not because they had to or because they were getting paid. Marcus taught me I'm capable of things I never thought I could do. He listens when I talk. He doesn't lie or make promises he won't keep. And he's the only person who ever made me feel like being different wasn't wrong." Riley's voice shook but held steady. "My mum left me at a fire station when I was 5, just walked away and never looked back. For 4 years I thought if I could just be better, someone would want to keep me. But Marcus was the first person who made me believe I was already enough." The courtroom was silent. Judge Huang looked at Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, do you understand the responsibility you're taking on? Raising a child, especially one with Riley's history, isn't going to be easy." "Your Honor, nothing worth doing is easy. But I lost my son 15 years ago, and I've spent every day since then trying to figure out how to keep living. Riley gave me a reason. Not to replace Daniel, never that. But to honor his memory by being the kind of father he believed I was. The kind of father Riley deserves." The judge reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up. "I'm granting temporary custody to Marcus Thorne with a path to adoption pending completion of required counseling and 6-month review. Riley will remain in Marcus's care." Riley's face split into the widest smile Marcus had ever seen. In the gallery, Margot Sullivan wiped tears from her eyes. Even Patricia Moore looked relieved. Outside the courthouse, journalists waited with questions about the mineral discovery, the custody case, the human interest angle of it all. Marcus ignored them, focused only on Riley walking beside him, holding a folder with official documents that said they belonged to each other now. "We did it," Riley said quietly. "We're just getting started," Marcus replied. That night, back at the cabin with official paperwork filed and futures suddenly tangible, Marcus made his final decision about the mineral rights. He called Catherine Wells first. "I want to establish a conservation trust. Protect the site from development, but allow controlled scientific research. Use any revenue from licensing the research to fund wilderness education programs for foster kids." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "You're walking away from $250 million. "No, I'm investing it differently. Riley and I don't need hundreds of millions. We need purpose. And if Morrison's deposit can teach other kids what those mountains taught us, that's worth more than any mining contract. The companies won't like it. They'll survive. Question is, Can you help me structure it legally? I can try. This is unprecedented, Marcus. Nobody walks away from this kind of money. Then maybe it's time someone did. The announcement was made at a press conference Marcus didn't want to hold, but lawyers insisted was necessary. Standing in front of the Pinewood Community Center with Riley beside him, he explained his decision to a crowd of confused townspeople and frustrated mining executives. The Morrison deposit, as we're calling it, will remain undeveloped. I'm establishing the Riley Daniel Thorne Wilderness Trust to manage the site, named for my foster child and my late son. The trust will protect the area while allowing scientific research and educational programs focused on wilderness survival and geology for at-risk youth. A reporter called out, "You're turning down hundreds of millions of dollars." I'm choosing what those mountains gave me: perspective, healing, and a second chance at being human. Some things are more valuable left wild. Another voice, Helen McCarthy from the general store. But think what that money could do for this town. Jobs, development, putting Pinewood on the map. Marcus looked at her steadily. Pinewood doesn't need to be on anyone's map. It needs to be exactly what it is, a place where people can escape the noise and remember what matters. The mining executives left angry, muttering about lawsuits and wasted opportunities, but others stayed. Margot Sullivan approached with tears in her eyes. "Your son would be proud." Tom Brewster, the retired sheriff, shook Marcus's hand for the first time in 15 years. "Maybe you're not as crazy as I thought." "Oh, I'm still crazy," Marcus said, "just differently than you assumed." Over the following months, the trust took shape. Catherine Wells helped navigate the legal complexities. The federal government, initially skeptical, eventually supported the conservation approach, given the ecological sensitivity of the area. Scientific institutions applied for research permits, offering funding that would support the trust's educational mission. And Marcus and Riley began planning the first wilderness survival program for foster youth, scheduled to launch the following summer. One evening in late fall, sitting on the cabin porch watching snow dust the mountain peaks, Riley asked, "Do you ever regret it, giving up all that money?" Marcus thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like with that kind of wealth. The security, the options, the ability to never worry about anything material again. But then I think about Morrison, spending his whole life chasing validation that never came, dying alone with his discovery still secret. And I realize I don't want to spend whatever years I have left proving anything to anyone except you. Proving that choosing people over profit, relationship over recognition, actually means something." Riley leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the mountains. The formal adoption was finalized on a gray morning in March, nearly 9 months after Marcus had first taken Riley camping. Judge Huang signed the papers in her chambers, official and quiet compared to the earlier custody drama. "Congratulations," she said, handing Marcus the documentation. "You're officially a family, Riley Thorne," the papers now read. A name chosen, earned, belonging finally to someone who wanted it. Walking out of the courthouse for the last time, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since before Daniel died. Complete. Not perfect, not without scars or challenges ahead, but whole in a way that had nothing to do with mineral deposits or vindication or proving skeptics wrong. "What now?" Riley asked, the question becoming familiar between them. Marcus looked at his child, no longer foster but fully his, and smiled. "Now we go home and figure out how to teach other kids what these mountains taught us. That we're worth more than people say. That wild things have value exactly as they are, whether mountains or minerals or kids the system gave up on." They drove back to the cabin through late winter snow, the truck's heater barely working, the radio playing static-filled country music, everything imperfect and exactly right. The first geological survey team arrived in April, scientists from 3 universities studying what Catherine Wells called the most significant rare earth discovery in modern North American geology. They confirmed Marcus's findings, documented everything, published papers that mentioned his name with respect instead of mockery. Former colleagues who distanced themselves 25 years ago reached out with congratulations and apologies. Marcus accepted both with equal grace and no particular satisfaction. He'd stopped needing their approval somewhere between finding Morrison's journal and becoming Riley's father. By summer, the wilderness program was ready. 10 foster kids from across Montana arrived for 2 weeks of hiking, geology lessons, survival training, and conversations around campfires about being exactly who you were without apology. Marcus and Riley led them into the same mountains where their own journey had begun, teaching fire building and rock identification, and the subtle truth that sometimes the most valuable discoveries had nothing to do with what you found in the earth and everything to do with what you found in yourself. On the last night, sitting around the fire with 10 kids who'd arrived defensive and left transformed, one of them asked Marcus why he'd given up so much money. He looked at Riley, who was showing a younger kid how to properly bank a fire for the night, and answered honestly, "Because I realized the real fortune wasn't in the ground. It was sitting right here, teaching me that second chances come disguised as 9-year-old kids who trust nothing but choose to trust you anyway. That's worth more than any mineral deposit ever could be." The mountains stood silent witness as always, keeping their secrets and holding their promises, wild and untouched and exactly as they should be. And 2 people who'd been called crazy and damaged sat together under familiar stars, knowing they'd found something more valuable than validation or wealth, or anything that could be measured in dollars. They'd found each other, they'd found home, and they'd found the kind of richness that had nothing to do with what you extracted and everything to do with what you protected, what you built, and who you chose to love. 3 years after Marcus Thorne walked away from $275 million, the mountains looked exactly the same. Unchanged, untouched, wild in the way that mattered most. But everything else had transformed in ways no amount of money could have purchased. The Riley Daniel Thorne Wilderness Trust occupied a modest building on the edge of Pinewood, converted from an old ranger station that the Forest Service had abandoned in 2008. Inside, topographic maps covered the walls alongside photographs of kids standing on mountain peaks, hands raised in triumph, faces split wide with the kind of joy that comes from discovering you're capable of things you never imagined. Marcus sat at a battered desk reviewing applications for the summer program. They'd received 143 requests for 30 spots, each application representing a kid the system had labeled troubled, difficult, or hard to place. Kids who reminded him of Riley, of himself, of everyone who'd ever been dismissed because they didn't fit conventional expectations. Riley, now 12 years old and carrying confidence like armor, walked in with a folder. "Dad, you need to see this one." Marcus looked up at the word that still made his chest tight with something like gratitude. 3 years of legally being Riley's father, and it still felt like a gift every time he heard it. "What have you got?" "Application from a kid in Billings. 10 years old, 7 placements in 3 years. Sounds familiar?" Riley's smile was knowing. "But look at the essay question. Why do you want to attend this program?" Marcus took the paper and read aloud. "Because I want to learn that being different doesn't mean being broken. Because everyone says I'm too much trouble, but maybe I just need different kinds of challenges. Because if Marcus Thorne and Riley could figure it out, maybe I can too." He set the paper down gently. "Approved. Make a note to assign them to my hiking group." Riley made the notation, then hesitated. "You ever wonder what life would be like if you'd taken the money? If we were living in some mansion in California instead of a cabin in Montana?" It was a question Riley asked periodically, testing whether Marcus's choice still held, whether the decision made in crisis remained valid in calmer times. Marcus's answer never changed. "Every day I don't wonder that is a day I know I made the right choice." But the money could have helped so many people. The money would have helped mining companies extract minerals and maybe, if we were lucky and careful, funded some charitable programs. What we're doing now helps kids directly, teaches them what no amount of money can buy, that their worth isn't determined by how well they fit someone else's mold. Riley nodded, satisfied, and returned to the filing system they'd developed together, organized by need rather than alphabetical order. The most urgent cases got attention first: kids aging out of the system, kids in crisis, kids who needed to know someone gave a damn right now, not eventually. The phone rang. Marcus answered, expecting another parent or social worker with questions about the program. Instead, a familiar voice said, "Marcus Thorne, it's been a long time." Marcus's hand tightened on the receiver. "Professor Martin." Dr. Richard Martin had been the lead skeptic at that conference in 1999, the one who'd publicly called Marcus's theories an embarrassment to serious geology. The man whose mockery had started the cascade that destroyed Marcus's career. "I imagine you're surprised to hear from me," Martin said. "That's one word for it. I'm calling because I read the papers your team published on the Morrison deposit. The geological formation, the mineral concentrations, the theoretical models explaining how such deposits could form in that specific mountain range." He paused. "You were right, Marcus, about all of it. And I was wrong." The words Marcus had dreamed of hearing for 25 years sat heavy in the silence between them. "I'm calling to apologize," Martin continued. "Publicly, if you'll allow it. To acknowledge that my skepticism was unwarranted and my ridicule was unprofessional. What you discovered changed our understanding of rare earth geology in North America. You deserved better than what we all gave you." Marcus looked out the window at the mountains, at Riley organizing files with the same careful attention Marcus had once given to mineral samples, at the photographs of kids who'd found themselves in wilderness and uncertainty. "I appreciate the apology," Marcus said carefully, "but I don't need it anymore. I understand if you're still angry. I'm not angry. I'm just done needing validation from people who only see value in things they can understand. You were wrong about my theories, yeah, but you were also wrong about what mattered. The minerals were never the point." Martin was quiet for a moment. Then what was? "Figuring out that being right and being whole are different things. I spent 15 years after Daniel died trying to prove my theories so people would respect me again. Took a 9-year-old foster kid to teach me that respect from people who'd already decided what I was worth wasn't worth having." That's surprisingly philosophical for a geologist. "I'm a father now. Comes with the territory." They talked for a few more minutes, Martin asking about the trust, the educational programs, the decision to protect rather than exploit. When they finally hung up, Marcus felt nothing like the vindication he'd once craved. Just a quiet satisfaction that he'd built something meaningful without needing anyone's permission or approval. Riley looked up from the files. "Who was that?" "Someone from my past apologizing for being wrong about me." "Did it feel good?" Marcus considered this honestly. "It felt unnecessary. I already know my worth. Don't need him to confirm it." Riley grinned. "That's very evolved of you, Dad. Don't get used to it. I'm still working on not eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week." The first group of summer participants arrived on a Sunday in late June, 30 kids between ages 9 and 15, all carrying the same expression Riley had worn 3 years ago: defensive, skeptical, waiting for the disappointment. Marcus stood before them in the Trust's main hall, Riley at his side, and spoke without notes or pretense. "Most of you are here because someone thought you needed fixing, because you've been in multiple placements, or you struggle in traditional schools, or you've been labeled difficult or troubled, or any of the other words people use when they mean doesn't fit our expectations." The kids shifted uncomfortably, recognizing truth. "But here's what I learned the hard way. Sometimes the problem isn't you. Sometimes it's that the boxes they're trying to put you in were never designed for people who see the world differently." He gestured to the mountains visible through the windows. "Those mountains don't care about your case file. They don't care if you've been in 3 placements or 13. They just demand that you show up honestly and learn what they have to teach." A girl in the front row, maybe 14, raised her hand. "What if we can't? What if we're actually broken like everyone says?" Riley stepped forward before Marcus could answer. 3 years ago, I thought the same thing. I'd been in 7 placements. Every family said I was too much trouble, Too damaged, too difficult. I believed them. Riley's voice was steady, practiced from telling this story to previous groups. But Marcus took me into those mountains anyway, taught me survival skills and geology and how to trust again. Not because I was fixed, but because I was exactly who I needed to be. So you're saying we're not broken? Another kid asked. I'm saying broken is a story people tell about things they don't understand, Riley said. The mountains taught me I was wild, not broken. There's a difference. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and Riley led the group through the same wilderness that had transformed them both. They taught fire building and navigation, rock identification and weather prediction. But more importantly, they taught resilience through action, worth through capability, belonging through shared challenge. Around campfires, kids shared stories they'd never told anyone. About parents who left, about homes that failed, about the slow erosion of believing you mattered. And Marcus and Riley listened without judgment or platitudes, just honest presence that said your story deserves to be heard. One night, sitting with a 10-year-old boy named James who'd been in 9 placements in 4 years, Marcus asked what he'd learned so far. That I can do hard things, James said quietly. Everyone always told me I couldn't handle stuff, that I needed special accommodations or extra help. But I hiked 8 miles today, built a fire by myself, identified 6 different rock types. Maybe I'm more capable than they thought. Or maybe, Marcus suggested gently, you were always capable. They just weren't asking the right things of you. James thought about this, staring into the flames. Do you think someone will want to keep me? Like, really keep me? Marcus's throat tightened, remembering Riley asking the same question 3 years ago. I think the right person is out there. Someone who sees you for who you are, not who they need you to be. Until then, places like this will remind you that you're worth keeping, whether someone else sees it or not. The program's reputation grew faster than Marcus had anticipated. By the second summer, they had applications from 12 states. News outlets ran stories about the geologist who'd given up a fortune to teach foster kids wilderness survival. TED Talk invitations arrived. Book deals were offered. Marcus turned down most of them, accepting only opportunities that directly supported the mission. He gave one interview to National Geographic, which ran a piece titled, The Mountain's Real Treasure, How One Man Chose Legacy Over Fortune. The article featured photographs of Marcus and Riley teaching kids to read topographic maps, quotes from former participants about how the program had changed their lives, and a sidebar about the Morrison deposit's scientific significance contrasted with Marcus's decision to protect it. One quote, pulled from Marcus's interview, became widely shared. They said I was crazy for walking away from $275 million, but I'd already lost everything that mattered once. This time, I chose to keep what was valuable, wild places, damaged kids, and the belief that some things are worth more left whole than broken apart and sold. The article brought unexpected consequences. Philanthropists reached out offering funding. Universities asked Marcus to guest lecture. Former foster youth who'd aged out of the system contacted the trust asking how they could help. And then, 6 months after the article published, a lawyer called with news that changed everything again. Mr. Thorne, my name is Gerald Hastings. I represent the estate of Catherine Wells. Marcus's chest went cold. Catherine, his friend and colleague who'd validated his findings and helped establish the trust, had died suddenly the previous month. Heart attack at 63, too young, too sudden. I'm sorry for your loss, Hastings continued. Dr. Wells spoke highly of you. In fact, she revised her will last year to include a significant bequest to the Riley Daniel Thorne Wilderness Trust. That's generous but unnecessary. Mr. Thorne, the bequest is $12 million. Marcus sat down hard, the number not quite processing. I'm sorry, what? $12 million, plus her personal geological equipment and research library. She specified the funds should support expansion of the wilderness programs and establish permanent endowments for foster youth scholarships. After the lawyer hung up, Marcus sat in stunned silence. Riley found him 20 minutes later, still holding the phone. "Dad, you okay?" Marcus looked at his child, at the office walls covered with maps and photographs of transformed lives, at the mountains beyond that had given them both purpose. "Catherine left us $12 million for the trust." Riley's eyes went wide. "The same Catherine who helped prove your theories?" "Yeah, apparently she believed in what we're doing more than I realized." They sat together processing this, the irony thick and strange. Marcus had walked away from $275 million to protect the wilderness and found purpose. Now purpose had somehow generated wealth anyway, not through extraction or exploitation, but through someone who valued what he'd chosen to protect. "What are you going to do with it?" Riley asked. Marcus thought about Catherine, about her dedication to science and education, about the conversations they'd had about legacy and what endured after we were gone. "We're going to build exactly what she wanted, expand the programs, create scholarships, maybe establish satellite locations in other states, help more kids learn their worth more than their case files say." "So we're keeping it? Using it?" "This is different than the mining money. That would have come from destroying something beautiful. This comes from someone who wanted to preserve what we're building. That feels right." Over the next year, the trust grew substantially. They established 3 additional wilderness sites in Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado, created year-round programming beyond summer camps, hired staff, including former foster youth who'd been through the programs and wanted to give back. Riley, now 13 and startlingly mature, took on increasing responsibility, leading hikes for younger kids, mentoring new participants, even helping conduct interviews for staff positions. One afternoon, Marcus watched Riley patiently teach a struggling 9-year-old how to properly pack a hiking bag, and felt something like awe. This was the same kid who'd arrived 3 years ago refusing to make eye contact, ready to bolt at the first sign of disappointment. That evening, Marcus pulled out Morrison's journal, which he kept in his desk drawer. He'd read it dozens of times, but certain passages still resonated differently as time passed. One entry from October 1892 caught his attention. "My partner Sullivan asks why I persist when so many doubt. I told him some truths are worth protecting whether others believe them or not. If I die with this secret, at least I die knowing I saw clearly when others were blind." Marcus understood now what Morrison had meant. It wasn't about being right versus being wrong. It was about trusting your own sight when the world insisted you were seeing things that didn't exist. He'd seen value in theories everyone called impossible. He'd seen worth in a foster child everyone called too difficult. He'd seen richness in wild places everyone wanted to exploit. And he'd been right about all of it, not because the world eventually agreed, but because he'd trusted his own judgment enough to act on what he knew was true. The 5th anniversary of the Trust's founding arrived on a bright autumn morning. They held a celebration at the original site where Marcus and Riley had made their first camp together, now designated as the heart of the Wilderness Preserve. Over 200 people attended. Former program participants, now teenagers and young adults, shared stories about how the experience had changed their trajectories. A 17-year-old named Maria, who'd been through the program at age 11, was now studying geology at the University of Montana on a trust scholarship. "Marcus taught me that being curious about rocks wasn't weird," she said, standing before the crowd. "That asking questions and seeing patterns others missed was a strength, not a problem. Now I'm following in his footsteps, and maybe someday I'll discover something important too." A 14-year-old named Devon, adopted 2 years ago by a family he met through the Trust's community network, spoke about finding belonging. "I thought I was unkeepable. That's what I told Marcus on my first day in the program. He said the problem wasn't me, it was that people were looking for kids who fit specific molds. I just needed to find people looking for exactly who I already was." Story after story, kid after kid, testimony to the ripple effects of one man's choice to protect rather than profit, to build rather than extract, to choose relationship over recognition. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood with Riley beside him, looking out at faces that represented everything they'd built together. 5 years ago, I was a broken man living alone in the mountains, trying to prove theories nobody believed so I could feel like I mattered again. Then social services asked if I'd foster a 9-year-old kid nobody else wanted, and I said yes for all the wrong reasons. Thought maybe helping someone else would fix whatever was broken in me. He looked at Riley, who grinned back. But Riley didn't fix me. Riley challenged me, made me question what I thought I was looking for, and whether proving old theories mattered as much as building new relationships. Together we found something worth more than any mineral deposit. We found each other. His voice caught slightly. The mountains I wanted to prove held fortune actually held something more valuable. They held space for 2 damaged people to become whole. They held lessons about worth that had nothing to do with extraction or validation. And they held the blueprint for what we're doing now, creating space for kids who've been told they're too much or not enough to discover they're exactly right. The crowd was silent, listening. So thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in what we're building. And thank you for remembering that sometimes the craziest thing you can do is walk away from fortune to chase purpose. Because fortune fades, but purpose endures. Later, as the celebration wound down and people dispersed to hike the trails or explore the preserve, Marcus and Riley climbed to the ridge where they'd first discovered the unusual rock formation 3 years ago. The sealed mine entrance was barely visible now, nature having reclaimed it completely. Only someone who knew exactly where to look would see any evidence that humans had once dug into the mountain searching for treasure. "Do you ever think about what's still down there?" Riley asked. "All those minerals just sitting in the dark?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "But then I remember that some things are more valuable left as mystery. The mountains don't need us to unlock their secrets. They just need us to respect what they are." Riley picked up a rock, examined it in the fading light. "Think I might study geology, like you did, like Catherine did." "Yeah? Someone needs to keep protecting places like this, making sure people understand that not everything worth discovering needs to be exploited." Marcus put his arm around Riley's shoulders, heart full. "Your brother would have liked you. Daniel loved these mountains for the same reasons you're learning to." "Tell me about him." They'd had this conversation before, many times, but it never got old. Marcus settled onto a sun-warmed boulder, and Riley sat beside him as he shared memories of Daniel. The way he could identify bird calls, his terrible jokes around campfires, his belief that his father was the smartest person alive, even when the rest of the world disagreed. "He used to say the mountains were breathing," Marcus said softly, "that if you got quiet enough, you could hear them. I always thought he was being poetic, but maybe he understood something I'm just learning. That wild places have their own rhythm, their own value, their own purpose that has nothing to do with what we can take from them." The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Below them, the preserve stretched out in protected wilderness, exactly as it should be. Not mined, not exploited, not transformed into something convenient or profitable. Just wild. Just itself. Just enough. "Dad?" Riley's voice was quiet. "Thank you for choosing me." Marcus pulled Riley closer. "Thank you for teaching me what was worth choosing." They sat together as darkness gathered and stars emerged in impossible numbers, the same stars Morrison had seen while dreaming of fortune, the same stars that had witnessed Marcus's journey from broken geologist to whole human being. And somewhere in the vast wilderness, in stone formations that held their secrets and minerals that remained untouched, the earth kept breathing. Patient and eternal, and exactly as valuable as it had always been, whether anyone chose to recognize it or not. Anyone can find treasure if they're willing to dig deep enough, but only the wise know that sometimes the real fortune lies in choosing what to protect, who to love, and what legacy to leave behind that has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with worth. As dawn broke over the Bitterroot Mountains on the first day of the 6th year, Marcus Thorne stood on his cabin porch with Riley at his side, no longer planning expeditions to prove old theories, but mapping the future of kids who deserved to know their value. The man they'd called crazy for bringing a child into the wilderness had become the father who brought wilderness to children who needed it most. The geologist who'd walked away from $275 million had built something worth far more, a legacy of transformation, a network of belonging, and proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust what you see when everyone else is blind. Because for Marcus, and for every kid who would walk these trails after him, the mountains had taught what no amount of money could buy, that worth isn't measured in what you extract, but in what you protect, what you build, and who you choose to become when the world stops watching. The hermit had found his family. The child had found a home. And the wilderness that held a secret worth millions had given them something priceless: each other, purpose, and the kind of richness that multiplied every time it was shared. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the greatest treasures aren't found in the ground, but in the courage to protect what matters most.